I just wanted to take a moment to say a massive thank you to all of you. Your support, comments, likes, and shares means the world to me and keep me motivated to create more content. Whether you've been here since the beginning or are a new subscriber, I appreciate each and every one of you. I hope you enjoy the videos.
In Latin America, in Spanish-speaking communities in the U.S., and especially in Mexico, no ghost story is told as often, discussed as enthusiastically, or interpreted as widely as the legend of La Llorona. La Llorona literally means the weeping woman. So it's not surprising that the main characteristic shared by all stories of La Llorona is that she weeps. Other than that one defining trait, the specter known as La Llorona varies widely. Many stories are told of what she looks like and what she does, and even more are told of how she came to be such a doleful spirit. A diverse array of La Llorona stories can be found in news accounts and across the internet. You can also find many collected in the book The Weeping Woman, Encounters with La Llorona by Edward Garcia Crowell and Judith Beatty. Looking through such stories, you'll find many variations. Sometimes La Llorona sees you from afar and pursues you, terrifying you as you flee toward your home. Sometimes she appears riding a horse. Sometimes she appears in your horse-drawn wagon or in your car, warning you against bad behavior before disappearing, just like that other famous spirit, the vanishing hitchhiker. In some stories, an encounter with her is fatal. La Llorona is often closely associated with children. In some stories, she is said to wail for her own lost or dead children. In many of these stories, she killed her own children when she was alive and is doomed for her actions to be a wandering ghost. In other stories, she appears mainly to women who have children, while in still others, she kidnaps children, who are never seen again. Of course, we do have some versions of the story tucked away in the dark corners of collections at the American Folklife Center and elsewhere at the Library of Congress. One great source is Bess Lomax Hawes's classic paper, La Llorona in Juvenile Hall, which is an account and interpretation of stories about La Llorona circulating in a juvenile detention center in California in the 1960s. Hawes's paper provides a variety of views on La Llorona, including the young women's stories, her review of other scholars' work, and her own interpretations. In the essay, Hawes described the many faces, literal and figurative, worn by La Llorona. Hawes also provided verbatim transcripts from children in juvenile detention. Here is a typical example. Another adds more gruesome details. Stories like the ones from Hawes's collection are not full narratives, but more like descriptions detailing what La Llorona generally does and what she looks like, with brief narrative passages about her origin. One more text of this sort seems worth including, since it contains many descriptions of the ghost's activities, since it has been very influential, and since it is available online from the Library of Congress. It was published by Thomas Allibone Janvier in 1906 in Harper's Magazine, and was reprinted in many newspapers, including the Washington, D.C. Evening Star, on November 29, 1906, see the last column. As is generally known, Senor, many bad things are met with by night in the streets of the city. But this wailing woman, La Llorona, is the very worst of them all. She is worse by far than the Vaca de Lumbre, that at midnight comes forth from the Potrero of San Pablo, and goes galloping through the streets like a blazing whirlwind, breathing forth from her nostrils smoke and sparks and flames. Because the fiery cow, Senor, while a dangerous animal to look at, really does no harm whatever. And La Llorona is as harmful as she can be. Seeing her walking quietly along the quiet street, at the times when she is not running and shrieking for her lost children, she seems a respectable person, only odd-looking because of her white petticoat and the white rebozo with which her head is covered. And anybody might speak to her. But whoever does speak to her in that very same moment dies. The beginning of her was so long ago that no one knows when was the beginning of her. Nor does anyone know anything about her at all. But it is known certainly that at the beginning of her, when she was a living woman, she committed bad sins. As soon as ever a child was born to her, she would throw it into one of the canals which surround the city, and so would drown it. And she had a great many children, and this practice in regard to them she continued for a long time. At last, her conscience began to prick her about what she did with her children. But whether it was that the priest spoke to her, or that some of the saints cautioned her in the matter, no one knows. But it is certain that because of her sinning, she began to go through the streets in the darkness, weeping and wailing. And presently it was said that from night till morning there was a wailing woman in the streets. And to see her, being in terror of her, many people went forth at midnight. But none did see her, because she could be seen only when the street was deserted and she was alone. Sometimes she would come to a sleeping watchman, and would waken him by asking, "What time is it?" And he would see a woman clad in white standing beside him with her rebozo drawn over her face, and he would answer, "It is 12 hours of the night." And she would say, "At 12 hours of this day I must be in Guadalajara, or it might be in San Luis Potosi, or in some other far distant city." And so speaking, she would shriek bitterly, "Where shall I find my children?" and would vanish instantly and utterly away. And the watchman would feel as though all his senses had gone from him, and would become as a dead man. This happened many times to many watchmen, who made report of it to their officers. But their officers would not believe what they told. But it happened on a night that an officer of the watch was passing by the lonely street beside the church of Santa Anita, and there he met with a woman wearing a white rebozo and a white petticoat. And to her he began to make love. He urged her, saying, "Throw off your rebozo that I may see your pretty face." And suddenly she uncovered her face, and what he beheld was a bare, grinning skull set fast to the bare bones of a skeleton. And while he looked at her, being in horror, there came from her fleshless jaws an icy breath, and the iciness of it froze the very heart's blood in him, and he fell to the earth heavily in a deathly swoon. When his senses came back to him, he was greatly troubled. In fear he returned to the deputation, and there told what had befallen him. And in a little while his life forsook him, and he died. What is most wonderful about this wailing woman, Señor, is that she is seen in the same moment by different people in places widely apart. One seeing her hurrying across the atrium of the cathedral, another beside the Arcos de San Cosme, and yet another near the Salto del Agua over by the prison of Belén. More than that, in one single night she will be seen in Monterrey and in Oaxaca and in Acapulco, the whole width and length of the land apart, and whoever speaks with her in those far cities, as here in Mexico, immediately dies in fright. Also, she is seen at times in the country. Once some travelers coming along a lonely road met with her and asked, "Where go you on this lonely road?" And for answer she cried, "Where shall I find my children?" and shrieking disappeared. And one of the travelers went mad. Being come here to the city, they told what they had seen, and were told that this same wailing woman had maddened or killed many people here also. Because the wailing woman is so generally known, Señor, and so greatly feared, few people now stop her when they meet with her to speak with her. Therefore few now die of her, and that is fortunate. But her loud, keen wailings and the sound of her running feet are heard often, and especially in nights of storm. I myself, Señor, have heard the running of her feet and her wailings, but I never have seen her. God forbid that I ever shall. A long, long time ago there lived a woman named Maria. She was the most beautiful woman in all of Mexico, muy hermosa, and she herself knew it too. Day after day male suitors begged her for her hand in romance, but day after day men returned home defeated, con el corazón roto. This was the livelihood of Maria until a dashing young gentleman galloped into town and turned Maria's life upside down. Ella se volvió loca. She knew in an instant that she had to have him, for he was the only man to match her in beauty and in elegance. Soon they were to be wed, and not long after had two delightful chiquititos. This delight, however, was short-lived, for one damning day the dashing gentleman became grotesque as he rode into town with another woman at his side. He rode up to Maria and pledged his life to this new woman whom he barely met because his current wife was no longer beautiful. Maria's heart burst into tiny shards of glass, invisible to the eye but painful for those handling it. That night, in a fit of sorrow and anger, Maria decided to inflict the same agony toward the man that bestowed it upon her. Maria woke her two boys up, took their hands and guided them to the river for a bath. Hand in hand, the three figures immersed themselves in the water, but under their mother's hand, the little niños never came up for air. After the blood-red glare of fury faded from sight, Maria realized what she had done. She shrieked from the gallows of her soul, "Mis niños," before letting the river water fill up her lungs. It is said now this weeping woman, or La Llorona, has returned from the hereafter, searching for new children to claim as her own for all eternity.